What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to my vlog. And so, as much as I've been talking about, interacting with all of you, encouraging you to leave comments and stuff like that, and how I, want to respond to those and all that, I realized, there was one comment back in one of my early videos that I kind of sort of answered, but only really halfway. The comment went something like, the person wanted me to talk about love and my thoughts on how our society portrays love and that kind of stuff. And I did that. But the other half of it, uh, that's, I guess I didn't really get into that too much. But before I get too much into it, I'm going to give this video kind of like a PG-13 or maybe T for teen rating, if you'd prefer. Initially, I had thoughts of, asking that anybody under 16 not watch this, just, kind of like I did with a couple of my Hot Topics videos, like the one on gay marriage and transgender stuff. But then I realized I maybe kind of want to tone that back a little bit, and I think you'll see why a little bit later on in the video. Anyway, I'm making humble requests that, people use discretion when viewing some of these videos, like this one. So the other half of the comment was asking me to talk about, my personal, I guess, romantic life up to this point, and then, talking about pornography and how that kind of affects especially the younger generation now, just young people in general, I guess, but really more just its overall effect on life as we know it, especially in the US. And now that I've been hearing reports, catching little blurbs on Facebook and such about Donald Trump wanting to get rid of pornography, it's all the more reason to just kind of talk about, some of the problems that it has. I mean, I could try and do a pro and con list, but if I'm honest, I see way more cons than I see pros to this. So anyway, yeah, all the more reason to talk about that. So, in terms of my own personal romantic relationships and that stuff, if I'm honest, there's been little to nothing there. I kind of sort of had a girlfriend like back in 8th grade, but I had absolutely zero romantic relationship sense or tact back in those days. I mean, this girl and I were friends, but we, never really. I I didn't really see us as much of anything more than that. I kind of just, even when we were kind of boyfriend and girlfriend, I basically just saw it as, okay, we're friends, but now we hold hands when we're together and stuff, and just little stuff like that. It was after that year she moved, and that was gone anyway. So yeah, that's the most romantic relationship I've had, which gives you a clue on how much knowledge and personal experience I have in this apartment, meaning very little. But then the other part of that half of the comment, talking about pornography and stuff, this is where I have a major confession to make. Even, as a mostly, good Christian boy, as I've been most of my life, that is really one of the few areas where I personally have struggled. It's one of those things where, to kind of paraphrase my youth pastor from when I was in high school, once something like that, once I guess lust in general becomes an issue for you, it's never really not an issue. There's always some extent where once that kind of thought process gets into your head, you're going to be, tempted to look at, you know, the opposite gender, the opposite sex, choose your terminology there. You're gonna have this temptation to look at people in a certain way the moment that ever becomes an issue, and from that point on, there's that temptation there. In terms of how that has affected younger people, pornography has been around in some ways for decades at least. But, before the advent of the internet, it was, a little more difficult to sneak it around and keep it private because you had to buy these physical things that would contain these images and content. But now it's so easily accessible. Literally, you can just go online and, you know, type a couple of words, do a couple of clicks, and you're there watching like some of the most explicit stuff that has ever existed. That's where I think it is becoming so much more of an issue for young people. I mean, even people my age included, anybody that is familiar with the internet, it becomes so much more of an issue because, a lot of young people especially are just constantly on the internet. They're using computers and video game consoles and cell phones like this that are constantly connected to the internet, and there's always that possibility. It could even be like, for me, I'm looking at anime stuff online and I happen to make one too many clicks, and I get into something that shows a character naked or something like that. The point being, that's all it takes to really open that door and to have this become an issue of sorts for anybody. A few ways that I think we kind of get this wrong in our approach, for parents, pastors, or anybody that doesn't want a younger person looking at pornography, is that, well, a couple of things. I think we tend to wait a little too long. I think there's some fear associated with talking about this with young people, kids, teenagers, because like there's a worry that they won't understand it and the whole thing will just go over their heads and we've wasted a whole bunch of time and effort for nothing. If I'm 100% honest, I was looking at pornography on the internet by the time I was 13, maybe even younger, which is weird thinking about that because it's literally half a lifetime ago for me. But then there's the other thing that I think a lot of people worry about, is that they're going to, by talking about this subject, they're going to somehow plant the idea in the kids' minds, and then it's almost like, because I brought it up as something not to do, then like reverse psychology kind of stuff, they're gonna do it because of that. I think that's the concern that some people, especially parents, have about addressing it too early. So I think there's that, and then I think another area where we kind of get this wrong in our approach in the way that we communicate this, especially in Christian circles, from my experiences, we'll get a bunch of people together we'll get a bunch of guys typically together in a group and talk about this and say, hey, porn is bad, don't do it, here's why. When I think this is something that is much better addressed on an individual basis, or at least in like a smaller group setting. Because this is it's a very personal subject. I mean, I feel all kinds of awkward talking about it myself just because of my history with it. The other part where a lot of people, Christians especially, get this wrong, or even just people in general that don't want their kids looking at this stuff, is that they, will like pound it into their heads that this is wrong. All the stuff about how it's degrading to women, it's gonna warp your view on women. I'm speaking from personal experience on this in terms of how people word it to guys. It needs to be instilled at a young age in a way that isn't like, bashing somebody's head in. Back to the original comment in question, as far as how this changes the perspectives of young people, how it affects them, I think when it comes to people who, regularly look at pornography, the one thing that I think kind of gets overemphasized as a consequence of it, at least talking to guys, is that it will make you treat women as objects. And I don't think that's necessarily always the case. I mean, given my little bit of history with this, I don't think it's like, I certainly don't feel like it changed my perspective on that at all. I mean, I was always kind of shy around people in general, and I think maybe it might have just kind of kept me shyer around girls than it did with guys, having that habit. But I don't think it really took me to the point where I saw women as objects. So, I mean, that can happen, I guess, for some people, but I think that gets mentioned far too frequently, almost to the point where it's a cliche that, that's a consequence of looking at pornography. But I do think it has a habit of potentially increasing your standards, I guess you could say, making it so that you are less attracted to certain types of women. That certainly can happen. As odd as this sounds, I think the industry of pornography as a whole at this point is actually becoming more diverse. They're trying to include different types of models and things like that. So that might actually be less of a case now than it used to be. But still, certainly there's that possibility. Or there's the reverse side of it, where it makes you see more of the sexualized features of certain people. It makes you focus more on certain aspects of them. But I think really some of the more significant consequences come with relationships and how it affects that. Because if you're in any kind of relationship with the opposite sex and you are habitually looking at pornography, at something that is, basically something that's meant to be an intimate experience, you are then consuming with totally different people that you don't even know personally, and it turns something that is meant to be with one partner, at least that's the way I see it, into just any time you get an urge, boom, it's right there. And just the expectations on that front also become heightened, I think, because then you feel like if your partner is not satisfying you in that way, then maybe they're not, maybe they're not meant for you. It's another way to just kind of cause a gap between you and the other person you're in a relationship with. And then another consequence that from some sources gets mentioned a fair amount, but I think on the whole it can be almost downplayed a little bit is just how addictive the habit of looking at pornography or any sexual imagery at all is. Like, it's actually a known scientific fact that looking at that kind of material just it sets off certain hormones and synapses in your brain that it can become addictive, similar to how a drug can. I mean, it might not seem as harmful, but just developing that habit, there's a fine line sometimes between where it's an addiction and where it's not. I think those are kind of the biggest consequences overall when it comes to pornography and making it a habit. I mean, just on a personal individual level. Then there's the kind of global consequence just in general of certain companies and organizations that produce this material throughout the world looking for different models in, basically guinea pigs for certain types of scenes and that kind of stuff. And some of them will even go as far as to kidnap and or rape the people that they use in these scenes. And that is definitely not something that needs to be encouraged. It takes away the person's freedom that's being victimized by this. It takes away, some of the sanctity, I guess would be the Christianese word for it. So it kind of, I guess, devalues that aspect of love in general, just for anybody, I think. In summary, yes, pornography is bad. It has far more bad effects out there than good. I mean, really the only good thing you could say about it in some respects is that it allows some people, women especially, to be able to make money and make a living for a while. Even then, you kind of wish there were alternatives. I think just that industry in general, as much as I would love to say just get rid of it all, at this point it's so ingrained in our culture and our society that it's one of those self-feeding circles where there's a very, very thin boundary between what is pornography and what is not, and the lines are very blurred in some ways. And again, it's just so easy to access that kind of material these days. I guess that's pretty much all I've got. I hope this answered the question more thoroughly. You know who you are, person that made this request, so you can give me feedback whether I answered, whether I responded to your request thoroughly enough or not. And whether or not you are that person, feel free, like I've been saying, to comment down below with your ideas for other topics, or, leave comments on this video, anything that you want to talk about. I'm here trying to make that connection, as this video is hopefully helping prove. That being said, I hope you are all doing well, and I will see you next time. Later.